Welcome to Lore of the Rings, where we uncover the hidden roads of Middle-earth and tell the tales that Tolkien never wrote. Before we begin, take a moment to let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time of day or night this narration has reached you. In the twilight years of the Third Age, when the last echoes of war had faded into memory and the great works of men began to rise like new dawn over Middle-earth, there stirred a melody that few could hear. It was not the clash of sword on shield, nor the thunder of marching armies, but something far more profound, the quiet music of friendship that transcends the boundaries of race, time, and even death itself. The War of the Ring had ended. Sauron's shadow had lifted from the world like morning mist, and peace settled over the lands like a gentle benediction. Yet in this peace, those who had walked the darkest paths together found themselves scattered like leaves before an autumn wind. The Fellowship, that sacred brotherhood forged in fire and sealed with blood, had dissolved into legend. Each member had taken up the mantle of their destiny, Aragorn to his throne, Sam to his garden, Merry and Pippin to the governance of their peoples. But what of those whose hearts beat to a different rhythm, whose souls were touched by something deeper than the affairs of mortal kingdoms? Beneath the misty mountains, in halls carved by Durin's folk in ages past, the stone remembered. Every strike of hammer, every whispered prayer, every laugh shared in darkness, all of it lived on in the crystal formations that grew like frozen music in the deep places of the world. And in the forests of Ithilien, where new growth pushed through soil once poisoned by shadow, the trees sang their own remembrance. They recalled the footsteps of an elf prince who had walked among them with wonder in his eyes, seeing beauty where others saw only ruin. These two places, cavern and forest, stone and leaf, seemed to pulse with an invisible connection, as if some invisible thread bound them across the leagues. The dwarf, who ruled the glittering caves, and the elf who tended the growing woods of Ithilien, had found in each other something that their own peoples could not provide. A mirror of their deepest selves, refined by difference into perfect understanding. But time, that great leveler of all things, pressed forward with inexorable purpose. The Fourth Age had begun, and with it came changes that would reshape the very fabric of Middle-earth. The dominion of men had commenced in earnest, and the elder days grew ever more distant, like stars dimming in the lightening sky of dawn. For the elves, the time of departure drew near. The ships waited in the grey havens, their white sails furled with patient longing, ready to bear the firstborn across the sundering seas to realms beyond the circles of the world. Yet, in this time of ending, when the very stones seemed to whisper of farewells, there came an occurrence that would be remembered in the secret annals of both dwarf and elf, though neither people would speak of it openly, for some truths are too precious to share with the world at large. It began with a sound that seemed to rise from the earth itself, a melody that spoke of friendship deeper than the roots of mountains, stronger than the pull of the sea. When the stars turned silver over Fangorn, their light falling like benediction on the ancient eaves where once the Ents had walked in majesty, a messenger came through the forest paths. He bore neither sword nor standard, carried no seal of earthly kingdom, yet his presence commanded a reverence that spoke of missions blessed by powers greater than mortal understanding. In his hand, he carried a letter sealed with the golden leaf of the greenwood. Ode, and written upon it, in flowing elvish script, were words that would set in motion the final chapter of one of the greatest friendships ever to grace the annals of Middle-earth. The letter was brief, as elvish correspondence often was, yet it carried within its graceful curves the weight of destiny itself. It spoke of journeys ending and beginnings, of promises kept and debts of the heart that transcended the boundaries of flesh. Most importantly, it carried an invitation, not to feast or celebration, but to something far more profound, a meeting that would seal the fate of two souls who had found in each other a completion that neither had known they sought. The sea longing had grown stronger with each passing season, pulling at Legolas Greenleaf like an invisible tide that knew neither ebb nor flow. In his woodland realm of Ithilien, where he had labored for decades to heal the wounds left by Mordor's poison, he could feel it calling to him with increasing urgency. It whispered in the rustling of leaves, sang in the babbling of streams, and shimmered in the morning dew that gathered on the petals of flowers he had helped to nurture back to life. The elf prince stood now at the edge of his domain, where the restored forest met the sweeping grasslands of Rohan, and gazed westward with eyes that had seen the light of the two trees reflected in the mirror of Galadriel. The work here was nearly complete. Where once had stretched the brown and barren wasteland of the No-Man lands, now flourished a paradise that rivaled even the gardens of Lothlorien in their prime. Malorn trees lifted their silver branches toward the sky, their leaves singing the ancient songs of Eldamar. Eleanor carpeted the forest floor in golden profusion, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with the peace that comes when the natural order is restored. Yet for all its beauty, Ithilien could not quiet the restlessness that had taken root in Legolas's immortal heart. The sea called, and he knew that soon he must answer. His ship waited in the harbour of Dol Amroth, crafted by his own hands according to the ancient traditions of his people, its white hull gleaming like swan's down, its masts tall and straight as the trees of his homeland. Prince Imrahil had given him leave to build it there, understanding with the wisdom of one who carried elvish blood in his veins that some departures were as necessary as breathing. But before he could sail into the west, before he could follow that silver path across the waters to the Undying Lands where his people waited, there was one final duty to perform, one last bond to honor. The friendship that had been forged in the fires of the War of the Ring, tempered in the shared trials of the Fellowship, and polished to brilliance through years of mutual respect and affection, deserved a proper farewell. In his private study, surrounded by maps of the waterways he had explored and treatises on the healing of corrupted lands, Legolas had penned a letter in the flowing script of his people. Each word had been chosen with the care of one who understood that some messages carry within them the power to change the course of fate itself. He had written of friendship that transcends the boundaries of race and mortality, of bonds forged in darkness and proven in light, of a journey that would soon carry him beyond the circles of the world, but need not carry him beyond the reach of love. The messenger who bore this letter was no ordinary courier. Chosen from among the most trusted of his guards, the elf had ridden through the night with the dedication of one who carries sacred relics. His path had taken him through the gap of Rohan, past the ancient fortress of Isengard, where now flowers bloomed in place of war machines, and into the foothills of the White Mountains, where dwelt one who had become legend among his own people. Meanwhile, far beneath the earth, in the glittering caves of Aglarond, Gimli, son of Gloin, lay, aboard at his greatest work. The dwarf lord had spent the years since the War of the Ring transforming the natural wonder of the caves into something that surpassed even the legendary halls of Khazad Dûm in their glory. Here, where water and stone had conspired across millennia to create formations of breathtaking beauty, Gimli had added the touch of dwarvish craftsmanship to create a masterpiece that spoke of both the natural world and the artistic soul of his people. Crystal formations that had taken eons to grow now caught and reflected the light of cunningly placed lamps, creating a symphony of illumination that seemed to pulse with its own inner life. Gimli had carved pathways through the caves that revealed each wonder in perfect sequence, like movements in a great musical composition. Here, a chamber where stalactites and stalagmites had grown together to form columns that rang like bells when struck with the proper tools. There, a pool so still and clear that it seemed to hold captured starlight in its depths, reflecting the crystalline ceiling above with such perfection that visitors often lost all sense of direction, unsure whether they stood on solid ground or walked among the stars themselves. But it was not merely the beauty of the caves that had occupied Gimli's attention during these peaceful years. With the patience that was the birthright of his people, he had also crafted something far more precious than any treasure of gold or silver. In a chamber at the very heart of the caves, where the formations created a natural amphitheater of stunning acoustics, he had carved a memorial to the Fellowship, not in the manner of human monuments that proclaim glory to the world, but in the subtle dwarvish tradition that speaks to those who have eyes to see and hearts to understand. Each member of the 9 Walkers was represented not by statue or inscription, but by a work of art that captured, read the essence of their contribution to the great task. For Frodo, a delicate sculpture of mithril that seemed to glow with inner light, representing the burden he had carried and the courage required to bear it. For Sam, a garden carved in living stone where actual plants grew in soil he had brought from the Shire, tended by springs that emerged from the cave walls with mathematical precision. For Merry and Pippin, twin fountains that danced and played together, their waters creating music that echoed through the chamber like laughter. Aragorn was honored with a sword carved from a single piece of crystal, its blade transparent, yet somehow more substantial than steel, its hilt wrapped with gold wire that caught the light and scattered it in patterns that reminded viewers of the stars that had guided the kings of old. Boromir's memorial was perhaps the most moving of all, a horn carved from the horn of an ox, silent now, but crafted with such skill that all who saw it could almost hear the call he had sounded at the end, the call that had saved 2 hobbits and redeemed a soul. Gandalf was represented by a staff of white wood, its length carved with runes that seemed to shift and change in the flickering light, speaking of wisdom that transcends the boundaries of mortality and power that serves rather than dominates. And for Legolas, there was a bow carved from the wood of a malorn tree, its string made of the finest mithril wire, so delicate it seemed spun from moonlight itself, yet strong enough to send an arrow to the very heart of darkness. For himself, Gimli had created no memorial, for the dwarf understood that the caves themselves were his contribution to the memory of their fellowship. Every carefully placed lamp, every perfectly carved pathway, every chamber revealed in optimal sequence, all of it was his gift to the future, his way of ensuring that the bow he and his companions had died to preserve would endure for ages yet to come. It was in this chamber, surrounded by these memorials to friendship and sacrifice, that Gimli received the message from Ithilien. The letter, when opened, revealed not only words of greeting and affection, but also an invitation that struck him with the force of prophecy. His friend of the tall tree shadow, as he had come to think of Legolas, in the privacy of his own heart, was preparing to depart for the Undying Lands. But before that final journey, he wished for one last meeting, one final sharing of the bond that had grown between them like a bridge spanning the ancient enmity of their peoples. Gimli read the letter 3 times, each reading revealing new depths of meaning in the carefully chosen Elvish phrases. Then he set it aside and looked around at his great work, seeing it now with new eyes. All of this, the beauty, the craftsmanship, the memorial to their shared past, would remain when he was gone, a testament to the friendship that had changed not only his own heart, but the very relationship between dwarf and elf for all time to come. Rising from his chair with the dignity that befitted a lord of the Khazad, Gimli began to make preparations for a journey. Not the final journey that might await him, but this penultimate one. A journey to honor friendship, to speak words that had waited too long in the heart, and to ensure that when the time came for farewells, they would be said with the fullness that such a bond deserved. But the tale does not end there, for in the shadows of memory, another truth emerges, one that speaks not only of friendship between dwarf and elf, but of the deeper currents that run beneath the surface of all great loves, binding souls together across the vast expanses of time and space with chains stronger than mithril, more enduring than the mountains themselves. To understand the magnitude of what was about to unfold in the glittering caves, one must first journey back through the mists of memory to those dark days when the world trembled on the brink of eternal night. The friendship between Legolas and Gimli had not been born in gentle meadows or peaceful halls, but forged in the crucible of war, tempered by shared danger, and refined through trials that would have broken lesser souls. When the Fellowship first gathered in Rivendell, the ancient animosity between elf and dwarf had seemed as immutable as the foundations of the earth itself. Their peoples had harbored grievances that stretched back through the long centuries, disputes over craftsmanship and territory, misunderstandings born of different ways of seeing the world, and wounds that had been passed down from father to son until they became part of the very identity of both races. Legolas had arrived at the Council of Elrond with the suspicion of his people burning bright in his eyes, while Gimli had carried the weight of dwarvish pride like armor upon his shoulders. Yet even in those early days, perceptive observers might have noticed something different in their antagonism. Unlike the cold hatred that sometimes exists between ancient enemies, theirs was a rivalry that sparked with the intensity of flint striking steel, as if some deeper recognition lay beneath the surface tension, waiting for the right circumstances to reveal itself. It was in the golden wood of Lothlorien that the first crack appeared in the wall between them. When Galadriel looked upon Gimli with those ancient eyes that had seen the light of the two trees, she saw not the stubborn suspicion of his people, but the nobility that lay at the heart of his character. Her gift of 3 hairs from her own head, freely given where once she had refused even a single strand to Fëanor himself, created a bridge of wonder that Gimli could not ignore. And when Legolas witnessed this unprecedented honor bestowed upon his companion, something shifted in his understanding of what it meant to truly see. The path through Moria had already begun to reveal the complementary nature of their skills. Where Legolas moved with the fluid grace of water finding its course, Gimli provided the steadfast strength of stone that endures all storms. The elf's keen eyes could pierce the gloom to spot dangers at great distance, while the dwarf's knowledge of underground passages and structural engineering proved invaluable in navigating the treacherous paths beneath the earth. Yet it was not merely their practical abilities that began to mesh like gears in some great clockwork of fate. It was their souls that slowly began to recognize in each other a kindred spirit dressed in unfamiliar form. By the time they reached the battlements of Helm's Deep, what had begun as grudging cooperation had evolved into something approaching friendship. Their famous contest during the battle, each keeping count of orcs slain while fighting side by side, revealed both the competitive spirit that drove them to excellence and the underlying trust that allowed them to protect each other's flanks without thought or hesitation. When Gimli's count reached 42 and Legolas claimed 43 with his impossible shot that brought down a massive Uruk-hai, their laughter rang out across the blood-soaked stones like a bell of hope in the darkest hour. But it was in the aftermath of that terrible night, as they walked among the fallen and tended to the wounded, that their friendship truly began to take on its mature form. They had faced death together and emerged not merely victorious, but transformed. The elf who had once sneered at dwarvish craftsmanship now openly admired the skill with which Gimli wielded his axes, while the dwarf who had dismissed elvish archery as mere showing off watched in genuine awe as Legolas sent arrow after arrow to its target with impossible precision. Their journey to Isengard and beyond became a masterclass in the art of friendship. Each day brought new opportunities for them to learn from one another, to share the wisdom of their respective peoples, and to discover that the differences they had once seen as barriers were actually complementary strengths that made them more effective together than either could be alone. Legolas taught Gimli to see the poetry in natural beauty, the way morning light transformed a forest into a cathedral of living gold, the manner in which water carved stone into sculptures of surpassing grace. In return, Gimli opened the elf's eyes to the deeper beauties that lay hidden beneath the surface of things, the mathematical precision of crystal formations, the way metal could be shaped and worked to reveal forms of startling elegance, the patience required to create lasting beauty through the application of skill and time. Their conversations during the long watches of the night revealed minds that, while shaped by different traditions, were fundamentally kindred in their appreciation for excellence, their loyalty to their companions, and their willingness to sacrifice everything for the greater good. They discovered that they shared a similar sense of humor, dry, observational, tinged with the melancholy that comes from seeing too much of the world's pain. More importantly, they found in each other what every soul seeks, but few ever find: complete acceptance without reservation, understanding without explanation, and affection that transcends all boundaries of birth or circumstance. The paths of the dead tested their friendship in ways that battlefield camaraderie could not. When Legolas felt the full weight of mortality pressing down upon him in those haunted passages, it was Gimli's solid presence that anchored him to the world of the living. When Gimli faced the terror of the sleepless dead with their etheria, elf forms and otherworldly menace, it was Legolas's unwavering courage that gave him strength to press forward. They had become not merely companions, but true battle brothers, each willing to face any horror rather than abandon the other to darkness. On the Pelennor fields, their partnership reached its full flowering. Moving together like dancers who had rehearsed their steps for centuries, they carved through the ranks of Mordor's forces with a precision and grace that became the stuff of legend. Gimli's axes cleared a path through the press of enemies, while Legolas's arrows found every gap in their defenses. When the dwarf's strength began to flag, the elf was there to cover his retreat. When Legolas found himself surrounded, Gimli's charge scattered his attackers like leaves before a storm. But perhaps the most profound moment of their friendship came not in the heat of battle, but in its aftermath, as they stood together amid the carnage and looked out over a field strewn with the bodies of those who had given everything for the hope of peace. Neither spoke, for words seemed inadequate to express the weight of what they had witnessed and shared. Instead, they simply stood together in comfortable silence, two souls who had found in each other something that would endure long after the memory of war had faded into legend. The years that followed the War of the Ring might have scattered the fellowship to the four winds, but the bond between Legolas and Gimli only grew stronger with time and distance. Letters passed between Ithilien and Aglarond with regularity, each filled with observations about their respective work, philosophical discussions about the nature of beauty and craftsmanship, and the gentle humor that had become the hallmark of their relationship. When Gimli needed rare woods for a particularly delicate carving project, Legolas would send carefully selected pieces from the forests of Ithilien. When Legolas sought understanding of geological formations that were damaging the roots of his trees, Gimli would provide detailed explanations along with suggested solutions. More than mere correspondence, these exchanges revealed two souls who had found in friendship a completeness that neither had known they lacked. The elf, who had once been restless as wind in the leaves, had found in Gimli's steadfast nature an anchor that allowed him to appreciate the deeper beauties of patience and endurance. The dwarf, who had once been as immovable as the mountains themselves, had discovered in Legolas's fluid grace a new understanding of how strength could manifest through flexibility and adaptability. Yet beneath these practical exchanges and philosophical discussions ran a deeper current, the knowledge that their time together was finite, bounded by the changing nature of Middle-earth itself. The Fourth Age had begun, and with it came the inevitable departure of the elves from the world they had helped to shape and protect. The sea longing that called to all of elvish blood would eventually claim Legolas, as it had claimed so many others, drawing him across the sundering seas to realms beyond the knowledge of mortal folk. This knowledge lent a poignancy to their friendship that neither acknowledged directly, but both felt with increasing intensity as the years passed. Every letter, every shared observation, every moment of understanding carried within it the shadow of eventual parting. Yet rather than diminishing their bond, this awareness seemed to burnish it to an even brighter shine, like a precious metal refined by fire, until it gleams with its own inner light. Now, as Gimli prepared to answer his friend's invitation to one final meeting, he carried with him not only the accumulated weight of their shared experiences, but also the profound recognition that some friendships transcend the boundaries of mortality itself. The bonds that had been forged in darkness and proven in light were about to face their ultimate test, not in battle against external enemies, but in the far more challenging arena of the heart, where love must find a way to endure even in the face of inevitable separation. Yet the fires that forge friendship may yet light the road to farewell, casting illumination into shadows that seemed impenetrable and revealing paths that connect souls across distances that seem impossible to bridge. The moon hung full and silver over the white mountains when Legolas arrived at the entrance to the glittering caves, its light transforming the landscape into something from the elder days when the world was younger and full of wonders that have since passed into legend. He came on foot, having left his horse at the settlement that had grown up around the cave entrance. A thriving community of craftsmen and scholars drawn by the reputation of Gimli's work and the natural beauty of the formations within. The elf prince moved with his characteristic silence, his footsteps making no sound on the stone pathways that Gimli had carved with such precision that they seemed to be natural features of the mountainside itself. Yet for all his stealth, he knew that his approach had been noted. Somewhere in the depths below, the dwarf lord waited with that patient stillness that was perhaps the greatest gift his people possessed. The ability to remain motionless for hours, even days, when the situation required it, yet spring into instant action when the moment demanded. As Legolas descended into the caves, following pathways illuminated by cunningly placed lamps that created pools of warm golden light at perfect intervals, he felt himself entering a realm that existed outside the normal boundaries of time and space. The air itself seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly quality, as if the countless crystals that adorned every surface had captured not just light, but something more essential, the very essence of beauty itself, distilled and concentrated until it took on almost tangible form. Each chamber revealed new wonders that took his breath away, despite his centuries of experience with the loveliest places in Middle-earth. Here was a gallery where flowstone formations had been enhanced with dwarvish carving to create the illusion of frozen waterfalls that seemed to cascade upward toward the ceiling. There, a room where stalactites had been carefully tuned to create a natural organ of stone, its notes ringing out with crystalline purity when touched by the slightest breeze. But it was not merely the individual beauties that impressed Legolas as he made his way deeper into the caves. It was the way they had been arranged and presented, the careful thought that had gone into creating a journey of discovery that built from wonder to wonder until the visitor's soul was opened completely to receive whatever revelation awaited at the heart of this underground realm. He recognized in this careful orchestration the same artistic sensibility that he had observed in Gimli during their years together. The same perfectionist attention to detail that made every arrow shot by the dwarf's companion in archery not merely accurate, but somehow inevitable. The final chamber, when he reached it, struck him with the force of prophecy fulfilled. The memorial to the fellowship that Gimli had created here was more than mere sculpture or carving. It was a prayer made manifest in stone and crystal, a meditation on friendship and sacrifice that spoke directly to the deepest chambers of the heart. Legolas stood for long moments before each piece, seeing not just the skill required to create such works, but the love that had guided every chisel stroke, every careful placement of crystal and metal. When he finally looked up from contemplating the bow that represented his own place in their shared history, he found Gimli watching him from the shadows at the far end of the chamber. The dwarf had aged in the decades since the War of the Ring, his beard now streaked with silver, and his face marked by the lines that come from years of careful work in dim places. Yet his eyes remained as bright and alert as ever, and when he stepped forward into the light, his bearing still carried the dignity that had impressed even the Lady Galadriel. "My friend of the Golden Wood," Gimli said, his voice carrying easily across the acoustic perfection of the chamber. "You honor my halls with your presence. And you honor our friendship with works that surpass even the legendary beauty of Khazad-dûm," Legolas replied, moving forward to clasp the dwarf's hands in the greeting that had become their custom. "I had heard tales of what you had created here, but words are poor vessels for carrying such beauty. One must see with one's own eyes to truly understand." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, two old friends who had learned that the deepest communications often required no words at all. Around them, the cave formations caught and reflected the lamplight in patterns that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm, creating an atmosphere of peace that felt almost sacred in its intensity. "I received your letter," Gimli said at last, his tone carefully neutral. "The sea calls to you." "It does," Legolas acknowledged, and there was a note of profound sadness in his voice that had not been there in their younger days. "The longing grows stronger with each passing season. Soon, I will no longer be able to resist its pull." "And you wish to sail west to the Undying Lands, as so many of your people have done before you?" "I do." The admission seemed to cost Legolas some effort, as if speaking the words aloud made them more real than they had been when they existed only in his own thoughts. "My ship waits in Dol Amroth, ready for the journey, Prince. Marahil has given me leave to depart whenever I choose." Gimli nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "And before you go, you wished to speak with me, to say farewell." "Not farewell," Legolas said quickly, then paused as if searching for words adequate to express what lay in his heart. "Or not farewell alone. I wanted to speak with you of many things, of friendship, of time, of the bonds that tie souls together across all the vast distances of creation. And I wanted to make you an offer." The dwarf's eyebrows rose slightly. "An offer?" Instead of answering immediately, Legolas moved to the center of the chamber and turned slowly, taking in once more the memorial that Gimli had created. When he spoke again, his voice carried the formal cadence of one making a pronouncement of great significance. "In all the long history of Middle-earth," he began, "there have been few friendships that have crossed the boundaries between the children of Ilúvatar as ours has done. Elf and dwarf have been estranged since the earliest days, when the Sindar of Doriath and the dwarves of Belegost first came into conflict over the Silmaril and the death of Thingol. That ancient wound has festered through all the ages since, poisoning the relationships between our peoples until suspicion and mistrust became as natural as breathing." He paused, looking directly at Gimli. "Yet we have proven that such barriers need not be insurmountable. In friendship, we have found something that transcends the accidents of birth and the inherited prejudices of our races. We have discovered that souls recognize souls, regardless of the flesh that houses them." "This is true," Gimli agreed, his voice soft with emotion. "Our friendship has been a gift beyond price. To both of us, I think, but also to our peoples. Perhaps in time, others will follow the path we have walked. That is my hope as well, Olas said. But for now, I am faced with a choice that tears at my very being. The sea calls, and I must answer. This is the nature of my people, as inevitable as the turning of seasons or the phases of the moon. Yet to answer that call means leaving behind not just Middle-earth, but everything and everyone I have come to love in this realm. He moved closer to Gimli, his expression intense with emotion, held barely in check. I cannot bear the thought of sailing west while leaving you here to face whatever years remain to you alone. You have been more than friend to me, Gimli, son of Gloin. You have been the brother of my heart, the companion of my soul. The thought of an eternity in the blessed realm, knowing that you remain here, growing old and passing into the circles of the world, while I exist in undying lands beyond your reach, is more than I can endure. Gimli stared at him in growing amazement as the import of these words began to penetrate. Legolas, what are you saying? I am saying that I want you to come with me, the elf replied, his voice ringing with sudden clarity and determination. I want you to sail west to the Undying Lands as my companion, as you have been my companion through every trial and adventure since we left Rivendell together so many years ago. The silence that followed this declaration seemed to stretch for eternity. Gimli stood frozen, his mind reeling as he tried to process what he had just heard. The Undying Lands, Valinor, the blessed realm where dwelt the Valar themselves and where no mortal foot had ever been permitted to tread. The very concept seemed to violate everything he understood about the nature of the world and the destiny of the different peoples who inhabited it. Is such a thing even possible? He whispered at last. I do not know, Legolas admitted. The straight road has been closed to all save the elves since the downfall of Númenor. No dwarf has ever sailed west to the Undying Lands, yet there are precedents. Frodo and Sam were permitted to make the journey because of the wounds they bore from their service in the Great Task. Gandalf sailed west because his mission in Middle-earth was complete. Perhaps the Valar might look with favor upon a friendship so deep and true that it transcends the boundaries they have established. He reached out and grasped Gimli's shoulders, his grip fierce with intensity. I know only this. I cannot sail west without at least offering you the choice. If you choose to remain here, I will honor that decision and carry the memory of our friendship with me into whatever eternity awaits. But if you are willing to risk the journey, if you are willing to trust in the power of the bond we have forged, then perhaps we might face together whatever lies beyond the circles of the world. Gimli looked up into his friend's eyes and saw there not just hope, but a desperate longing that mirrored his own deepest feelings. For in truth, the thought of spending whatever years remained to him without the companionship of this remarkable being who had become the other half of his soul was equally unbearable. Age was beginning to weigh upon him, and while dwarves were long-lived compared to men, he was not immortal as the elves were. The day would come when his strength would fail and his skills would desert him, when the great work of his life would be complete and nothing would remain but the slow decline into whatever rest awaited his people beyond death. But to sail west with Legolas, to face together the unknown shores of Valinor, and whatever judgment the Valar might pronounce upon such an unprecedented journey, that was a prospect that filled him with both terror and exhilaration in equal measure. The risk is great, he said slowly. If the Valar refuse permission for a dwarf to enter their realm, what fate might await one who dared to tempt the journey uninvited? I do not know, Legolas replied honestly, but I know this. Whatever that fate might be, it could not be worse than the fate of living forever with the knowledge that I chose safety over love, prudence over loyalty. If we are to be judged, let us be judged together. If we are to face whatever consequences might arise from this choice, let us face them as we have faced everything else, side by side, with complete trust in each other and in the rightness of what lies between us." Gimli was quiet for a long time, his gaze moving from Legolas's face to the memorial chamber around them, taking in once more the representations of their fallen companions and the beauty that surrounded them on all sides. This place that he had created with such love and care, this masterwork that represented the culmination of all his skills and knowledge. Was he truly prepared to leave it behind for a journey into the unknown? Yet as he looked at the carved bow that represented Legolas, at the crystalline sword that stood for Aragorn, at all the memorials to their shared past, he realized that the most important thing in this chamber was not the stone and crystal, but the living being who stood before him. The work would endure. Others would come to marvel at what he had created and to understand something of the friendship that had inspired it. But the friendship itself, the actual relationship that gave meaning to all the rest, that was something that could not be preserved in stone or crystal. It lived only in the connection between two souls, and if that connection was to be severed by the insurmountable distance between Middle-earth and the Undying Lands, then the most essential part of what he had built here would be lost regardless of how long the physical structures might endure. When he looked up at Legolas again, his decision was clear in his eyes before he spoke a word. "My friend of the Silver Leaf," he said, his voice so steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to commit to. "I have spent my life working with stone and crystal, learning to see the hidden beauty that lies within even the most unpromising raw material. I have learned that the greatest masterpieces are often created not through the addition of new elements, but through the patient removal of everything that is unnecessary, everything that obscures the essential truth that was always there, waiting to be revealed." He paused, choosing his words with the same care he brought to his finest carving work. "Our friendship is like that. It has been refined over the years through shared trial and mutual trust until everything non-essential has been burned away, leaving only what is most true and most valuable. I will not see that masterpiece destroyed by the mere accident of our different origins. If you will have me as your companion on this greatest of all journeys, then I will sail west with you gladly, whatever the consequences might be." The smile that transformed Legolas's face was brighter than all the crystal formations in the cave combined. He stepped forward and embraced Gimli with a fervor that spoke of relief and joy and gratitude beyond the power of words to express. For a moment, the ancient enmity between their peoples seemed not just healed, but transformed into something precious and new. A demonstration that love could indeed conquer all barriers, even those that seemed written into the very foundations of the world. Yet even as they held each other in the joy of this moment, both friends knew that the hardest part of their journey still lay ahead. The decision had been made, but the path to its fulfillment would require courage beyond anything they had yet demonstrated, faith beyond anything they had yet been called upon to exercise, and a trust in the ultimate goodness of creation that would be tested to its very limits. But for now, in this chamber beneath the earth where beauty and friendship had combined to create something that transcended both, it was enough to know that they would face whatever came together, as they had always done, with complete confidence in each other and in the bond that united them across all the vast distances of time and space. In the days that followed their momentous decision, Gimli led Legolas through every corridor and chamber of the glittering caves, sharing not just the physical beauty of what he had created, but the deeper stories that lay behind each carefully crafted detail. Each formation told a tale, not just of geological processes spanning millennia, but of the patient work that had gone into revealing and enhancing the natural wonders that lay hidden within the mountain. They walked together through galleries where water had carved stone into flowing sculptures that seemed to capture motion in permanent form, their surfaces polished by dwarvish tools until they gleamed like silk in the lamplight. Gimli explained how he had discovered each formation during his years of exploration, how he had studied the way light fell and shadows gathered, how he had planned the pathways and lighting to create the most powerful emotional impact for visitors. Beauty, he said, as they stood before a massive column where stalactite and stalagmite had grown together over countless ages, is not merely about what pleases the eye. True beauty speaks to something deeper. It reminds us of truths we had forgotten, connects us to realities that transcend the immediate concerns of daily existence. Every choice I made in the creation of these chambers was guided by that understanding. Legolas nodded, recognizing in his friend's words the same philosophy that had guided his own work in the forests of Ithilien. You have created something that will endure long afterward. We have passed beyond the circles of the world, he said. Future generations will walk these paths and feel their souls lifted by what you have accomplished here. They paused before a pool so still and clear that it perfectly reflected the crystalline formations on the ceiling above, creating the illusion of infinite depth that made viewers question which way was up and which was down. In its waters, tiny lights seemed to dance, reflections of reflections that created patterns too complex for the mind to fully grasp, yet somehow perfectly harmonious. Do you know what this reminds me of? Legolas asked softly. Tell me. The mirror of Galadriel, not in its ability to show visions of what was or might be, but in the way it seems to reveal truths that exist beyond the reach of ordinary perception. Looking into these waters, I feel as though I am seeing not just stone and crystal, but something of the music of creation itself, the harmony that underlies all existence, made visible in patterns of light and reflection. Gimli smiled at this observation. You see truly, my friend. That was indeed what I hoped to achieve here. The dwarves have always understood that the earth itself is alive, that stone and crystal are not dead matter, but living things that grow and change according to laws as beautiful and mysterious as those that govern the movement of stars. In revealing the beauty that lay hidden within these caves, I was not imposing my will upon dead matter, but collaborating with forces that had been at work here since the world was young. They moved on to other chambers, each revealing new aspects of Gimli's artistry. Here was a room where he had carved channels in the stone to guide the flow of water, creating music as it trickled and flowed. Not the simple sound of dripping, but complex harmonies that changed with the seasons as the water level rose and fell. There was a gallery where crystals had been arranged to catch and amplify even the smallest sounds, turning whispers into songs and footsteps, into rhythmic patterns that seemed to dance through the air. But it was in the chamber of the Fellowship Memorial that they spent the longest time, as Gimli shared the stories behind each piece and the thoughts that had guided their creation. The mithril sculpture representing Frodo, he explained, had been crafted to capture not the physical appearance of the hobbit, but the spiritual weight he had carried, the way the burden of the ring had both diminished and enlarged him, wearing away everything non-essential until only his purest courage remained. I spent months working on this piece, Gimli said, running his fingers gently over the flowing lines of the sculpture. Mithril is the most challenging of all metals to work with. It seems to have a will of its own, resisting any attempt to force it into unnatural shapes. Yet when approached with patience and respect, it yields to the craftsman's vision in ways that create beauty impossible to achieve with lesser materials. Like Frodo himself, it appeared fragile, but possessed a strength that could endure anything. The garden he had created for Sam was perhaps the most complex of all the memorials, requiring not just skill in stonework, but deep knowledge of botany and hydrology. He had carved planting beds directly into the living rock, then engineered a system of springs and channels that provided exactly the right amount of water and nutrients for each type of plant. The soil itself had been specially mixed from earth brought from the Shire, enriched with minerals from deep within the mountain to create growing conditions that allowed even the most delicate flowers to flourish in the depths of the caves. "Sam would have understood this better than any of us," Gimli said as they watched water trickle through carefully carved channels to nourish beds of Eleanor and Nifredile that glowed like captured starlight in the lamplight. He knew that gardens are not created by imposing human will upon nature, but by understanding natural processes so deeply that you can work with them to achieve effects more beautiful than either could accomplish alone. The twin fountains representing Merry and Pippin were marvels of engineering as well as art, their waters dancing together in patterns that seemed both random and inevitable. Gimli had studied the mathematical principles underlying fluid dynamics for years to achieve the precise effects he desired. Streams that leaped and played together, separating and rejoining in patterns that spoke of friendship, adventure, and the innocent joy that the two young hobbits had brought to even their darkest hours. "They were the heart of our company in many ways," he explained as they watched the water dance. "When despair threatened to overwhelm us, their laughter reminded us what we were fighting for. When the burden of our task seemed too great to bear, their courage in the face of terrors beyond their understanding inspired the rest of us to find strength we didn't know we possessed." Aragorn's crystal sword was perhaps the most technically challenging piece in the entire memorial. Gimli had searched for years to find a crystal formation large enough and pure enough to serve as raw material, then spent months learning to work with the alien medium. Unlike metal or stone, crystal required entirely different techniques. It could not be heated and hammered into shape, but had to be carved with tools of extraordinary precision, following the natural lines of force within the material to avoid shattering. "The crystal taught me patience," Gimli said, as they examined the sword's transparent blade, which seemed to hold light within its depths like captured fire. Every cut had to be perfect the first time. There was no margin for error, no way to repair a mistake once made. It was like working with destiny itself, which yields only to those who approach it with complete understanding and absolute commitment. Boromir's horn, carved from a single piece of horn taken from the great aurochs that still roamed the mountains near his home, was silent yet somehow more eloquent than any sound it might have made. Gimli had polished its surface until it gleamed like amber, then carved upon it scenes from the warrior's life, not just his final sacrifice at Amon Hen, but moments of joy and fellowship that revealed the man he had been beneath the burden of his people's expectations. He was more complex than any of us understood at the time, Gimli reflected as they studied the intricate carvings. The ring showed us all our weaknesses, but in Boromir, it found fears and desires that ran deeper than the ocean. Yet in the end, those very weaknesses became the source of his greatest strength. He died as he had lived, protecting those who could not protect themselves, giving everything he had to give without counting the cost. Gandalf's staff was a masterwork of both wood carving and metalwork, its white surface inlaid with patterns of mithril wire so fine they seemed like captured lightning. The runes that covered its length had been copied from texts in the library of Minas Tirith, ancient symbols of power and wisdom that seemed to shift and change in the flickering light. He was never truly gone, even when we thought we had lost him in Moria, Gimli said, as they examined the staff's intricate details. The wisdom he shared with us, the courage he inspired, the love he showed for all the peoples of Middle-earth, these things became part of us, part of who we were and who we would become. In creating this memorial, I tried to capture not just his power, but his compassion, not just his wisdom, but his willingness to sacrifice everything for the sake of others. Finally, they came to the bough that represented Legolas himself, carved from malun wood with a string of mithril so fine it seemed spun from moonlight. Of all the pieces in the memorial, this was the one that had required the most thought and the deepest understanding of its subject. I wanted to capture not just your skill as an archer, Gimli explained, but the grace that informs everything you do, the way you move through the world as if you were part of it rather than separate from it, the way you see beauty in everything around you and somehow help others to see it too. Legolas was quiet for a long time as he studied the bow, seeing in its perfect curves and delicate inlays not just a representation of his physical skills, but something deeper, a reflection of how he appeared in the eyes of one who truly knew and understood him. "You see me more clearly than I see myself," he said at last. "Looking at this, I understand something that I had never fully grasped before. Our friendship has not just enriched our lives, it has revealed to each of us truths about ourselves that we could never have discovered alone. In your eyes, I see not just who I am, but who I am capable of becoming." They stood together in contemplative silence, surrounded by these monuments to their shared past and the companions who had shaped their understanding of what friendship could accomplish. Yet even as they honored the memory of what had been, both were acutely aware that they stood on the threshold of something unprecedented, a journey that would test not just their courage, but their faith in the fundamental goodness of creation itself. "These will endure," Gimli said, gesturing to encompass the entire memorial chamber. "Long after our names have been forgotten, the revelers will come here and feel something of what we experienced together. The beauty we discovered in friendship, the truth we learned about the possibility of healing ancient wounds, the hope we found in each other. All of it will remain, transformed into stone and crystal, but alive with the same spirit that created it." Legolas nodded, understanding that this was Gimli's way of making peace with leaving behind the greatest work of his life. Like the elven ships that carried his people west to the Undying Lands, the memorial would serve as a bridge between worlds, a testament to the truth that some things transcend the boundaries of time and mortality, enduring in forms that speak to the deepest needs of the heart. Yet as he looked upon the bow that represented his own place in this enduring testament to friendship, Legolas felt something he had not expected. Not sadness at leaving Middle-earth behind, but a deep peace that came from knowing that their story would continue to inspire long after they themselves had passed beyond the circles of the world. And Legolas wept, not with sorrow, but with joy at the recognition that some beauties are too precious to be contained within the boundaries of any single world, too powerful to be limited by the accidents of birth or race or time. Such beauties must be shared, must be carried forward, must be trusted to find their own way of enduring regardless of what changes the turning of ages might bring. As the days passed in the depths of the glittering caves, Legolas found himself experiencing the sea longing in a way that was both familiar and utterly transformed. The pull of the waves was still there, as insistent as ever, but now it carried with it something new, not just the call of departure, but the promise of a journey shared. The difference was profound, changing the very nature of his relationship with that ancient yearning that had haunted his people since the first ships sailed from the Graias, havens. He spoke of this to Gimli as they sat together beside the pool that reflected the crystalline ceiling like captured stars, their voices creating soft echoes in the vast chamber that surrounded them with beauty beyond the power of words to describe. "I have lived with the sea longing for so many years that I had come to think of it as a form of homesickness," Legolas said, his words carrying the weight of centuries of experience. "A pull towards something lost, something left behind that could never be recovered in this mortal realm. But now I begin to understand that it was never about loss at all. It was about completion. The sea calls not because it represents an ending, but because it offers a new beginning. A chance to take everything we have learned and experienced in Middle-earth and carry it forward into whatever lies beyond." Gimli listened with the patience that had become second nature to him over their long friendship. understanding that his companion was working through thoughts and feelings that had been building for decades. The dwarf had his own relationship with the deep places of the world, the way stone and crystal called to him, the way he could feel the pulse of the earth itself in the depths of the caves. He recognized in Legolas's description of the sea longing something similar to his own connection with the bones of the world. "And now you hear something different in that call?" he asked. "I do," Legolas confirmed, his voice filled with wonder at his own discovery. "Where once it spoke only in my own voice, now it sings in harmony. Where once it offered only solitude, now it promises companionship. The longing is still there, stronger than ever, but it no longer feels like a burden to be borne alone. It has become something we can share." They were quiet for a while, each lost in contemplation of what lay ahead. The decision to keep the journey together had been made, but the practical preparations required careful thought and planning. Legolas's ship waited in Dol Amroth, but it had been designed for a single passenger and would need modifications to accommodate a companion, especially one of Gimli's solid build and very different needs. More challenging still was the question of provisions and equipment for a journey unlike any that had ever been attempted. The straight road to the Undying Lands was not a path that could be traveled with ordinary maps and charts. It required faith more than navigation, trust more than skill, and a willingness to surrender to forces beyond mortal understanding. "Have you given thought to what we should carry with us?" Gimli asked. "Not just food and water for the journey, but tokens, perhaps. Things that represent what we have learned in Middle-earth, what we wish to preserve and carry forward." Legolas smiled at the question, recognizing in it the same thoughtful approach that Gimli brought to all his greatest works. "I have been thinking about that. For myself, I know I must carry seeds from the forests of Ithilien, Malin and Elenor, Nifredil and Lisuin. If we are permitted to enter the Blessed Realm, perhaps we might plant gardens there that will speak of the beauty we found in this world." "And I have been considering which of my tools to bring," Gimli replied. "Not all of them. The ship could not carry the weight, but perhaps my finest chisels, the ones I used to carve the memorial chamber, and a selection of stones and crystals from these caves, samples of the beauty we are leaving behind." They continued to plan, but their preparations went beyond the merely practical. Both understood that they were about to embark on a journey that would test them in ways that no previous adventure had done. The perils they had faced together, orcs and cave trolls, the paths of the dead, the battlefields of the War of the Ring, these had been external challenges that could be met with courage and skill. What lay ahead was different, a test of faith, a challenge to their understanding of the very nature of existence itself. "Do you think," Gimli asked during one of their evening conversations, "that the Valar will understand what has grown between us? Will they see in our friendship something worthy of preservation, or will they view it as an aberration to be corrected?" It was a question that had haunted both of them since the decision was made, though neither had spoken it aloud until now. The Undying Lands had been established as a realm for the elves, a place where the firstborn could exist in perfect harmony with the music of creation. The presence of a dwarf in such a place would be unprecedented, a violation of the cosmic order that had governed Middle-earth since its foundation. "I do not know," Legolas admitted, "but I have been thinking about the nature of the music itself, the great theme that Eru Ilúvatar sang into existence at the beginning of all things. Tolkien spoke of how Melkor's discord was woven into that music, how even evil served ultimately to create new themes of greater beauty than would have been possible without it. Perhaps our friendship represents something similar, a harmony that could only arise from the apparent discord between our peoples." He paused, organizing his thoughts before continuing. "Consider what we have learned from each other. Through your eyes, I have come to understand beauties that I never would have perceived alone. the patient artistry of crystal formation, the mathematical precision that underlies the greatest architecture. The way endurance can itself become a form of grace. Through my influence, you have discovered forms of beauty that had been closed to your people, the music of growing things, the poetry of wind and water, the way flexibility can be its own kind of strength. We have become more than either of us could have been alone, Gimli agreed. Neither fully elf nor fully dwarf, but something new, something that incorporates the best of both our natures while transcending the limitations of either. Exactly. And if that is true, then perhaps our journey represents not a violation of the cosmic order, but its fulfillment. Perhaps the music of creation itself has been guiding us toward this moment, preparing us to carry into the West something that could not have existed in Middle-earth alone. A demonstration that love can indeed transcend all boundaries, even those that seem written into the very foundations of existence. It was a hopeful interpretation, but both friends understood that hope alone would not guarantee their success. They would be placing their lives and their eternal destinies in the hands of powers beyond their full comprehension, trusting that the same forces that had guided them through their friendship would continue to watch over them in their greatest adventure. As they made their final preparations for departure, both carried with them not just the practical necessities for the journey, but something far more precious, a collection of memories that represented the best of what they had shared together. For Legolas, these included the morning he had first seen Gimli laugh at something other than battle, the afternoon when the dwarf had shown him how to read the stories written in stone formations, the evening when they had sat together in comfortable silence and realized that they no longer needed words to communicate the deepest truths. For Gimli, the treasured memories included the day Legolas had first asked his opinion about the cultivation of rare flowers, the moment when the elf had deferred to his judgment about the structural integrity of an ancient bridge, the countless times when his companion had demonstrated that respect and affection could coexist without either diminishing the other. These memories, more than any physical token, would be their true cargo on the journey west. They carried within them proof that friendship could indeed transcend every barrier, that understanding could grow between the most unlikely companions, that love in its purest form was indeed the most powerful force in all of creation. The morning of their departure from the glittering caves arrived with a clarity that seemed to make every detail more vivid, every color more intense. As they walked together through the chambers one final time, both friends felt the weight of what they were leaving behind. Not just the physical beauty of the caves, but the life they had built in Middle-earth, the certainty of the known world, the comfort of familiar shores. Yet stronger than any sadness was the anticipation of what lay ahead. They had faced the unknown together before, and had always found in their combined strength something greater than either possessed alone. Now they would test that partnership against the greatest unknown of all, the vast waters that lay between Middle-earth and the Undying Lands, and whatever judgment awaited them on the far shore. But the whisper of the sea had grown stronger as the moment of departure approached, and now it spoke not in one voice but in harmony, not of ending but of beginning, not of separation but of unity that would endure beyond the circles of the world. In that music, both friends heard the promise that some bonds are indeed strong enough to transcend mortality itself, some loves pure enough to earn recognition even from the valor themselves. The harbour of Dol Amroth at dawn was a place of ethereal beauty, where mist rose from waters that seemed to hold liquid starlight in their depths. The white towers of the city caught the first rays of the sun and threw them back in patterns of gold and silver that danced across the waves like promises of the wonders that lay beyond the horizon. It was here, in this ancient port that had seen the departure of so many elven ships, that Legolas had built his vessel for the final journey. The ship itself was a masterwork of elvish craftsmanship, its design based on traditions that stretched back to the earliest days when the Eldar had first learned to navigate the waters between the seen and unseen worlds. Its hull gleamed like polished pearl, carved from wood that had been grown specifically for this purpose in the forests of Ithilien, trees that Legolas had tended and sung to for decades, shaping their growth until they yielded timber with the exact properties needed for a vessel that would sail not just upon ordinary seas, but upon the straight road itself. The masts rose tall and graceful as forest trees, their wood so carefully seasoned and carved that they seemed to sing with their own inner music when the wind caught them. The sails, woven from the finest materials that could be gathered from across Middle-earth, bore no heraldic devices or mystical symbols. Their power came not from magic, but from the skill and love that had gone into their creation, the same qualities that had made Legolas's friendship with Gimli possible. Prince Imrahil had come to see them off, his presence lending an air of official blessing to their unprecedented journey. The Prince of Dol Amroth carried Númenórean blood in his veins and understood better than most mortals the significance of what was about to unfold. He had provided not just harbour space for the construction of the ship, but also supplies and assistance that spoke of his deep respect for what the unlikely friendship between elf and dwarf represented. "You carry with you the hopes of more than just yourselves," the prince said, as they stood together on the dock, watching the harbour workers make the final preparations for departure, in proving that the ancient enmities between the peoples of Middle-earth need not endure forever. You have given us all a glimpse of what might be possible when love overcomes prejudice, when understanding bridges the gaps that seemed unbridgeable. Legolas inclined his head gracefully, recognizing both the honor and the burden that Imrahil's words represented. "We carry those hopes gladly, my lord, though we cannot know what judgment awaits us beyond the circles of the world. We sail not as representatives of our peoples, but as friends who have found in each other something too precious to surrender to the mere accident of mortality." Gimli, standing solidly beside his companion, despite the way the ship's gentle motion made him occasionally reach for support, added his own perspective. "If we succeed in our journey, we will have proven that friendship can indeed transcend all boundaries. If we fail," he shrugged with characteristic directness, "if we fail, at least we will have failed together, attempting something worthy rather than accepting a separation that neither of us could bear." The loading of their personal belongings had taken most of the previous day, each item chosen with care for its significance rather than its practical value. Legolas had brought with him seeds and saplings from every type of tree and flower that had grown in his care during his years in Middle-earth. Not just the expected Malern and Eleanor, but also samples of the hardy mountain flowers that had been among the first to colonize the formerly poisoned lands around Mordor, and cuttings from fruit trees that had been gifts from the hobbits of the Shire. Gimli's contribution to their cargo was equally thoughtful, but very different in character. His personal tools came first, the chisels and hammers and measuring devices that had been his constant companions through decades of masterwork. But he had also brought samples of stone and crystal from every significant formation in the glittering caves, each piece carefully selected to represent a different aspect of the beauty he had helped to reveal. Most precious of all was a small casket containing earth from the deepest chambers of his caves, mixed with soil from the Lonely Mountain and dust from the halls of Khazad-dûm, a concentration of everything that had shaped the dwarvish understanding of the world's hidden beauties. Perhaps most significantly, both friends had brought with them detailed journals of their experiences in Middle-earth, written accounts of their friendship that chronicled not just the external events they had shared, but the internal transformation that those experiences had wrought. These volumes, more than any other cargo, represented their true gift to whatever realm might receive them, proof that consciousness could indeed evolve, that understanding could deepen, that love could grow strong enough to overcome barriers that had seemed absolute. As the morning progressed and the time for departure drew near, both friends found themselves experiencing emotions too complex for easy analysis. There was anticipation, certainly, and excitement at the prospect of the greatest adventure of their lives. But there was also a profound melancholy at leaving behind everything they had known and worked for in Middle-earth. The forests and caves, the friends and colleagues, the very landscape that had shaped their understanding of what it meant to be alive. "Do you think we will be able to return?" Gimli asked as they stood together at the ship's rail, looking back toward the shore, where a small crowd had gathered to witness their departure. "If the Valar permit us to enter their realm, will we ever again see the mountains and forests of Middle-earth?" "I do not know," Legolas replied honestly. "The legends speak of the Undying Lands as a place apart from the circles of the world, existing in a different relationship to time and space than the realm we know. It may be that once we cross the boundary between the seen and unseen worlds, the path back will be closed to us forever." He paused, his gaze moving from the shore to the western horizon, where their destination lay beyond the reach of ordinary sight. "But I have come to believe that some journeys are worth taking, regardless of whether they offer the possibility of return. What we have shared together in Middle-earth has been precious beyond measure, but it was always bounded by the limitations of this mortal realm. Perhaps in the Undying Lands, we will discover new dimensions of friendship, new possibilities for understanding, new ways of being together that we could never have imagined while we remained bound by the constraints of time and mortality." The final preparations were completed with the efficiency that comes from long planning and careful attention to detail. The ship had been provisioned not just with food and water for the journey, but with everything needed to maintain both physical and spiritual health during what might prove to be a voyage of considerable duration. No one knew exactly how long it took to sail the straight road to the Undying Lands. The few accounts that existed spoke in terms of timeless experience rather than measurable duration. When Prince Imrahil gave them formal leave to depart, his words carried the weight of blessing as well as farewell. "May the winds carry you swiftly to your destination," he said, "and may whatever powers govern the waters between the worlds look with favor upon your unprecedented journey. You sail not just for yourselves, but as representatives of the possibility that exists within all of us, the possibility of transcending our limitations through love." The ship's departure from the harbor was marked by a sense of ceremony that seemed to arise naturally from the significance of the moment. The morning mist that had clung to the water began to lift as they moved away from shore, revealing waters that seemed to glow with their own inner light. The wind that filled their sails was gentle but steady, carrying them westward with a purposefulness that suggested they were indeed traveling on currents that served powers greater than themselves. As the coastline of Middle-earth receded behind them, both friends stood together at the stern of the ship, watching the familiar landmarks fade into memory. The towers of Dol Amroth were the last to disappear, their white stones catching the morning light until they seemed like distant stars, before finally vanishing beneath the horizon. "And so we leave behind everything we have known," Gimli said, his voice carrying a mixture of sadness and wonder. "Whatever comes next, we can never return to the world we knew before this moment." "No," Legolas agreed, "but we carry that world with us. In our memories, in our hearts, in the lessons we have learned, and the love we have shared. All of it comes with us on this journey. We are not abandoning Middle-earth, but carrying its best qualities forward into whatever realm awaits us." As they sailed westward into waters that grew progressively more luminous and strange, both friends felt the ordinary laws of the world beginning to shift around them. The stars became visible even in daylight, forming patterns that had never been seen from the shores of Middle-earth. The waves themselves seemed to sing with voices that spoke of ancient promises and possibilities beyond the reach of mortal imagination. Yet through all the wonder and strangeness of their passage, the one constant was their friendship itself, the bond that had brought them to this point and that would sustain them through whatever trials or transformations lay ahead. In each other's presence, they found the courage to face the unknown, the strength to trust in forces beyond their understanding, and the faith that some bonds are indeed strong enough to transcend all boundaries. Gimli laughed softly as he felt the ship respond to currents that existed in no earthly ocean. The laugh of a dwarf who had discovered that the greatest treasures are not found in the depths of mountains, but in the depths of the heart, not won through skill with hammer and chisel, but through the patient work of understanding and acceptance that allows two very different souls to become one. The waters of the straight road defied every expectation that mortal understanding could bring to them. As Legolas and Gimli sailed westward from the familiar shores of Middle-earth, they found themselves traveling not miles across an ocean, but through a realm where the very nature of existence seemed transformed. The boundaries between sea and sky became fluid, interchangeable, as if they sailed not upon water, but through liquid starlight that responded to currents invisible to ordinary perception. Time itself took on a different quality in these waters. The sun neither rose nor set in any predictable pattern, but rather seemed to dance across the heavens according to laws that spoke of music rather than mechanism. Sometimes it hung directly overhead like a golden bell, filling the world with warmth and clarity that made every detail of the ship stand out with crystalline precision. At other moments, it would sweep in great arcs across the horizon, painting the waters in shades of amber and rose that had no names in any earthly language. The stars, too, behaved in ways that challenged every assumption about the nature of the cosmos. They appeared not just at night, but during the day, their light somehow harmonizing with, rather than competing against, the radiance of the sun. Constellations that had been visible from Middle-earth took on new configurations, while entirely new patterns of light appeared in regions of sky that had always been empty. Most remarkably, the stars seemed to respond to the ship's presence, growing brighter as they approached certain regions of the celestial sphere, as if offering guidance or blessing to the unprecedented journey. For Legolas, these transformations were both wondrous and familiar. His elven nature allowed him to perceive the deeper harmonies at work in their strange voyage, to feel the presence of powers that shaped their passage with benevolent intent. He could sense in the shifting patterns of light and water something akin to the music that had been present at the creation of the world. Not the original music of the Ainu, which was beyond mortal comprehension, but echoes and harmonics of that primal song that spoke of continuity and purpose. "Do you feel it?" he asked Gimli as they stood together at the ship's bow, watching waters that seemed to flow upward as well as forward, carrying them along currents that existed in dimensions beyond the merely physical. The sense that we are not just traveling to a destination, but being transformed by the journey itself. Gimli nodded slowly, his typically practical mind struggling to process experiences that challenged every category of understanding he had developed over his long life. Yet beneath the intellectual confusion was a deeper recognition, a certainty that something profound was occurring, something that would fundamentally alter not just their location, but their very nature. "I feel it," he admitted. "It's like being carved by invisible tools, shaped by forces I cannot see or understand, but somehow trust completely. Every league we travel, I feel myself becoming different. Not less than I was, but more. As if possibilities I never knew existed are being awakened within me." This transformation was perhaps most evident in their physical experience of the voyage. Neither had felt hunger or thirst since leaving the harbour of Dol Amroth, though they occasionally shared meals from their provisions, more for the comfort of familiar ritual than from any bodily need. Sleep, too, had taken on a different quality, not the heavy unconsciousness of mortal rest, but a gentle drifting into dreams that seemed more real than waking life, filled with visions of realms and possibilities that expanded their understanding of what existence could encompass. During one such dream state, Gimli found himself walking through halls that dwarfed even the greatest achievements of his people's architecture. The corridors were carved not from stone, but from what appeared to be crystallized music, their walls resonating with harmonies that spoke directly to the soul. Very surface reflected light in ways that revealed new beauties with each step, creating an environment where artistry and functionality achieved perfect unity. In such halls, a voice said behind him, though when he turned, he saw no speaker. The skills you have developed in Middle-earth will find new expression. The patience you have learned, the precision you have mastered, the love of beauty that has guided your greatest works, all of these will serve you well in realms where the raw materials are not stone and metal, but the fundamental forces of creation itself. Legolas experienced his own visions during these periods of transcendent rest. He found himself in forests that made even the glories of Lothlorien seem like pale shadows by comparison. Here, trees grew not just from soil, but from pure intention, their forms shaped by the thoughts and desires of those who tended them. The air itself was alive with possibility, responding to song and poetry by manifesting new forms of beauty that existed nowhere else in all of creation. Such groves came a voice like wind through leaves that had never known autumn. Await those who have learned to see beyond the surface of things. Your work in healing the poisoned lands of Middle-earth has prepared you for labors of even greater significance. Here, you will help to create beauties that will endure for ages beyond counting, expressions of the music that will inspire all who encounter them. But perhaps the most profound visions came to them jointly, experienced simultaneously in a sharing of consciousness that transcended the normal boundaries between individual minds. In these moments, they found themselves in a great hall where beings of light moved in patterns too complex for description, their forms shifting between individual identity and collective harmony with fluid grace. "Behold," said a presence that spoke not in words, but directly to their understanding, the nature of friendship as it exists in realms beyond mortality. Here, the bonds you have forged will not endure, but will become the foundation for new forms of connection, new possibilities for consciousness to explore its own infinite potential. What you have discovered together in Middle-earth was but the first note of a symphony that will continue to unfold throughout eternity. These visions filled both friends with anticipation rather than anxiety about what awaited them. Whatever judgment might be pronounced upon their unprecedented journey, they began to understand that the very fact of their passage through these transformative waters was itself a form of blessing. They were being prepared, shaped, refined in ways that would allow them to exist harmoniously in whatever realm they were destined to enter. The ship itself seemed to participate in this transformation, its physical structure becoming more translucent and luminous with each passing day of their strange voyage. The masts now gleamed like captured lightning, while the hull had taken on a pearl-like translucency that allowed the light of the waters to shine through it in patterns of breathtaking beauty. The sails, once white as snow, now shimmered with colors that had no earthly names, rippling with auroras of possibility that spoke of winds beyond the merely atmospheric. "We are becoming something new," Legolas observed, as he ran his hand along the ship's rail, feeling beneath his palm not wood, but something more fundamental, the crystallized intention of craftsmanship elevated to divine artistry. not just in our destination, but in our very essence. The boundary between who we were and who we are becoming is dissolving like mist before the sun. And yet, Gimli replied with characteristic insight, we remain ourselves. Whatever we are becoming includes and transcends rather than replacing what we have been. Our friendship, our experiences, our growth together, all of it is being woven into something larger rather than being left behind. This recognition brought them both a deep peace that sustained them through the more challenging aspects of their transformation. There were moments when the dissolution of familiar categories of experience became almost overwhelming, when the very foundations of identity seemed to shift beneath them like sand. But in these moments, they found in each other an anchor that held steady, even when everything else seemed fluid and uncertain. Their conversations during this period of passage took on a quality unlike anything they had experienced before. Words became less necessary as their understanding of each other deepened, while the words they did exchange carried meanings that seemed to expand and resonate long after they were spoken. They found themselves discussing not just what they had experienced together, but what they might become, what possibilities their friendship might explore in realms where the limitations of mortality no longer applied. "Do you think," Gimli asked during one such conversation, "that we will still be recognizably ourselves when this journey ends? Will the dwarf and elf who began this voyage still exist in whatever forms we assume in the Undying Lands?" "I believe we will be more ourselves than we have ever been," Legolas replied after long consideration. "Everything that has defined us in Middle-earth, our love of beauty, our dedication to craftsmanship, our loyalty to each other, these qualities are not being diminished but amplified, refined, given new dimensions for expression. We are not losing our identities, but discovering what those identities were always meant to become." As their voyage continued through waters that grew ever more luminous and strange, both friends began to sense that their destination was approaching. The quality of light around them was changing, taking on a warmth and richness that spoke of inhabited shores. If realms where consciousness had shaped reality according to visions of perfect beauty. The stars ahead grew brighter and more numerous, while those behind began to fade, as if acknowledging that the travelers had moved beyond their sphere of influence. Most significantly, they began to hear something that might have been music or might have been voices, a sound that seemed to emerge from the very fabric of existence itself, welcoming them toward shores that had never before received visitors of their kind. In that music, they heard echoes of every song they had ever loved, every moment of beauty they had ever shared, every truth they had discovered together during their long friendship. But they also heard something new, possibilities they had never imagined, beauties they had never conceived, forms of existence that transcended every limitation they had ever known. The music spoke of friendship not as they had experienced it in Middle-earth, but as it could become in realms where love was the fundamental force that shaped reality itself. And so the last ship to leave Middle-earth, bearing passengers of such diverse nature, continued its unprecedented journey, carrying the laughter of a dwarf and the song of an elf toward shores where such distinctions would dissolve into unity without losing their essential character, where friendship would find forms of expression that would echo throughout all the ages yet to come, creating new harmonies in the eternal music of creation itself. Thus ends the tale of the secret meeting between Legolas and Gimli after the War of the Ring, not with farewell, but with transformation. Their journey into the West became legend among both elves and dwarves, spoken of in whispers around forge fires and in the halls of woodland realms. Some say the valor granted Gimli passage for his pure devotion to Lady Galadriel and his unprecedented friendship with one of the firstborn. Others claim that love itself, in its truest form, possessed the power to transcend any boundary established by the music of creation. What remains certain is this: In sailing together beyond the circles of the world, they proved that some bonds are indeed stronger than the foundations of existence itself. Some friendships so profound that they reshape the very nature of what is possible between souls who dare to see beyond the accidents of their birth to the eternal truths that unite all consciousness in the endless dance of being. And in the blessed realm, it is said, there grows a garden where malin trees shade pools that reflect starlight like captured song, tended by two gardeners whose friendship has become a living symbol of what unity can accomplish when it honors rather than erases the differences that make each soul unique. Their laughter echoes still across those immortal shores, carrying with it the promise that love, once awakened to its full potential, endures forever, world without end, beyond the reach of time or change or any force that would dare to stand against the fundamental music of creation itself. Dear listener, this story ends, but many await. Subscribe so no tale escapes you.